So what is it we're going to be doing today? Well, today we're going to be continuing with our lecture content. So I didn't bother checking. Are those on? I can't see from here. Yes, cool, awesome, good. So last time what we had done was that we had started on lecture 1. We are on our site, and we are continuing with our site. We had asked the question, what is data science? Asking the question, what is data science, requires us to understand what science is. And science is anything by which we can apply the scientific method. And what is the scientific method? Well, the basics of the scientific method are that we make an observation, we develop a hypothesis, and then we test the hypothesis. And then the data aspect of data science is that it has to do with information. Just kind of a simple version of what data is. So by placing those two words together, we have understood what data science is, which is that it is where we are applying the scientific method of noticing something, hypothesizing something, and then testing it to information. Okay, so it actually sounds then frighteningly easy. And we could state differently that just data science is the process of extracting meaningful insights from data using scientific methods, tools, and processes. Awesome. That's what we, in fact, talked about. We talked about business analytics, which is a subfield of data science. We also talked about data-driven decision-making, not really developing how to do data-driven decision-making, but rather we talked about the importance of it. We also talked about how the data science process could be broken down into steps. We're not going to individually go through each of the steps, but the basics are data collection, data cleaning, data analysis, data visualization, and then decision making. And that each of these steps is vital to the process. We talked about that some real world examples would be things like retail analytics. Some other examples would be things like sports analytics. Other examples would be what we would refer to as customer sentiment analysis, which is kind of like the example of what things like Amazon does when it creates those AI generated responses of 96% of customers thought that this was a good product. Those are examples of sentiment analysis. And sentiment analysis is just really where you're kind of coming up with an overall idea of what the customers believe, feel, and or do in regards to a product. So now we're going to have a branch out of where we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the data-driven decision-making process. So the data-driven decision-making process is one of the things that is most influential when it comes to data science and, well, business. And it's the thing that's talked about the most. It's sometimes abbreviated as triple DM, so DDDM. Wait, D. Yeah, I said it the right number of times. For some reason, I felt like in my head I said it twice, and then I couldn't remember what I'd said until I had to remember what I said. So making decisions based upon instinct or gut feel has, or I'd like to hopefully say had been, the default for many business leaders for decades. It was the go-to, which is that you just kind of use your prior experience, and that prior experience was either coming from your actual, decade or decades of work experience, or else it was that you were having a team of individuals, all of whom had experience, and they were lending that experience towards a decision, and it really wasn't based upon any actual collection of information in regards to the customers. Now, when you hear about that, hopefully, for all of you of where you live in the information age, that sounds nuts to just make a decision off of your gut and to not use the information that's available. I'm hoping that sounds crazy to you to just use your gut. Because we know, for instance, that if we wanted to find out information about how many customers were making a purchase, by and large, there's probably a file somewhere that says that, right? Well, when we then think about X number of years in the past, it's not that people were lazy. It's not that people didn't know that that would have been something good to do. It was just that at the time, it would have been impossible. Okay, so what are the reasons why at the time it would have been impossible? Okay, well, so let's go dramatically far in the past. The year 1950. Woo-hoo. Okay, now I'll tell you, I was not alive then. So if you're thinking I was alive then and I'm making reference to it in that way, you guessed too high. You guessed way too high. I'm not that old. So the year 1950. There are some things that are dramatically different about life in the year 1950 versus today. How is life different in the year 1950? The internet doesn't exist. Okay, so that's one major thing. Did computers exist? Really, really big ones. Okay, so what do we mean really, really big ones? Okay, so computers at that time were so large that they would take up entire rooms. We're talking about like a room like this. Yes.
Talk about like once you had these switches, like it would require paper operators, like switches, like they would have to, like it wouldn't be like these kinds of, it'd be like the real big ones that would require several people to operate them, like.
Absolutely. It was much closer to, and this is a weird way of saying it. It was closer to like having a train, like an old-fashioned steam engine train. It's closer to that than it is to our modern day computer. That's kind of like the simple, it's a poor analogy, but it's the simplest way of describing it. Like there was that level of complexity of where it's like people pulling levers and things to make things happen. Okay, now let's advance forward quite a bit. So 30 years past 1950, and let's go 1980. In 1980, are there computers more in line with how we know them? I'm asking you about periods of time you weren't alive for. I know that. So 1980, yes, we have actual like computers. Are they laptops? Predominantly, no. There are versions of laptops, but by and large, it's a desktop computer, and it has very limited functionality in comparison to the laptops we have in front of us. In fact, this tablet that's right here has way more capabilities than the finest desktop computer that was being normally sold in 1980. In fact, the capabilities of this watch well exceed the capabilities of a desktop computer at that time. And then in 1980, did most people have access to the internet? No. Okay, so purchases were still physical purchases using physical paper as receipts for the purchases. And you probably had some sort of a computer system, but by and large, if you had a computer system, it was doing something really just to the effect of digital bookkeeping, but not really tracking things live. Okay, now we're going to advance 20 more years into the future, the year 2000. Now in the year 2000, what's different?
You have to have more like modern, like guys, computers, like these kind of things, like laptops.
Absolutely. And in terms of the internet, where are we at? Do we have the internet? Year 2000, we have the internet. But what is it we don't really have that at the moment we have? Connection speed is dial-up. What are phones like at the time? AI doesn't, so I'm going to say doesn't exist in quotes, and we're going to come back to that. Yeah. It's flip phones. Yeah. And so does the average person walking around have access to the internet? No. But also different from that is that the ability to track people is much less. So our phones give a phenomenal way of tracking what people are doing. A remarkable ability to track what people are doing. Now, this is not like a government conspiracy talk you're now hearing about, like they're trying to, find out everything we do in order to control how we brush our teeth. But the point is we have more information being collected on us on the regular than if we go back to the 1950s in some of the best instances. And then if we go back to the 1980s, still more information on average collected on people than some of the best instances in the 80s and in the 2000s, at least like the early 2000s. So we have more information collected now than any other time in history. So one of the things that I go through with people in one of my advanced data science courses is that I go over how what you can learn from how long someone's cursor is on a screen. That information is collected, not just where your cursor is, but how long it is at a particular location. So right now, for instance, my cursor has stayed right in this proximity in the middle of the screen for a little bit now. Well, where it is on the screen tells a lot without me ever needing to click. So the fact that it was staying there, what do you suppose it probably says? I was looking at whatever was there, or I didn't scroll down. So somehow I got lost. So I'm either reading or I started doing something else. So that means we could kind of boil it down to one of two things is probably happening. It's either interesting what's on the screen, or it's not interesting enough to keep my attention. But it feels pretty solid that that's one of the two decisions that we need to have. Well, that's the kind of information that is being collected on you when you're on a website. And it's being tracked in accordance with an individual identification. That wasn't possible in 1980. That was possible in the year 2000, but the capabilities were not as good in terms of the knowledge of this as it is today. And so when we talk about the change in data-driven decision-making, it's not that people X number of years ago just didn't use what was available. It literally wasn't available. And so this is where we're seeing that the way that business is done is changing, and it's changing rapidly. We also, as was pointed out, have artificial intelligence, which is huge. Now, real quick history thing in terms of that. Artificial intelligence, in terms of the theory of it, the ideas that make it work, it goes back to the 1800s. It is not a modern thing. Back in the 1800s, many of the ideas for how to do artificial intelligence were being developed. And they were being developed at the same time as another development, which is that mathematics was being formalized. So mathematics is something that we think about as being like this. Well, it's been around for thousands of years, and it has in certain forms. So if you want to talk about like geometry, so in other words, studying things like triangles and circles, that goes back thousands of years. But our modern version of mathematics, of where we use symbols for it with like X's and Y's and things like that, that is a much newer invention. Much, much newer. And so actually what we see is that with that new modern invention of mathematics comes huge insights that hadn't developed before. So math takes giant leaps forward, and with it goes giant leaps forward in physics, which makes giant leaps forward in engineering, which means that we have the capability of producing better and more things, which jumps us forward in industrialization, which then at the beginning of the 1900s sees more things produced than any other time in history. And as you're producing more things, then there's more that you have to keep track of. So the need for computing begins to pick up. And that's why we see that early versions of calculating devices, which eventually turn into computers, develops in the 1920s, and then more and more and more as more and more need is placed on the need to calculate. so that by the 1950s, computers, as we would know them, truly exist. And then as computers truly exist and people continue to work at them, and then as resources go down, as more is being produced, by the time we get to the 1980s, you then have to be way better about controlling things, which is why then computing has really, really, really developed. And now it's instituted across corporations. And then by the time you get to the 2000s, you're now talking about you as a corporation have so many customers, more customers than anyone could have ever dreamed about having before, that you now have huge amounts of information you have to track. So there's very specific reasons for these developments, and they follow along with history. And the ideas behind artificial intelligence are quite old, but they're new to us because it's only now, really truly now, that we have the capabilities of actually implementing artificial intelligence. And one of the tremendous movements forward was that we now actually have processing speed that's fast enough we can implement the techniques that we've known about since the 1950s. We now also have the cloud capabilities of being able to download locally in order to process the information that we need. Okay, so that's some sort of loose history on why it is that this idea of a gut decision-making, why it's disappearing now and why it was not disappearing before. So turning to your partners, and by your partners, it means anybody near you. Why might relying solely on gut instinct lead to missed opportunities? What would be some reasons you would say? Talk with each other. So what would you say? What would be some things that you might potentially miss as opportunities if you only rely upon your gut? Yeah. You could be biased for your own product. What else? Yeah.
You could miss over critical information that would help you make a more educated decision.
Yeah, you could miss over critical information.
Process the information could not be accurate. It might be like only partially right, and it could be like maybe misleading.
Absolutely. What it is that you are thinking in your gut could be only partially correct because your own personal experiences is limited. And that gets into the idea of bias. Yes. I couldn't hear. Yeah, fear. So it's a common part of human nature that we fear for things that we're unaware of. And so oftentimes gut-based decision making could be based upon an emotion and not based upon information at all. Okay, so what is data-driven decision-making? Now that we've kind of talked about why it is that gut decision-making is a thing that's disappearing. Well, data-driven decision-making is the process of making decisions based on data analysis and interpretation rather than intuition or observation alone. Now, bias, as we've now referenced it a couple of times, is a tendency to make decisions based on personal judgment or assumptions. And I'm going to say it's almost 100% of the time going to lead to inaccurate conclusions given enough time. So actionable insights. So that's kind of like a key phrase, which is information derived from data that directly informs and improves decision-making. So an example of this is a retailer choosing which products to stock based on customer purchase data rather than personal preferences. So if, for instance, I owned a grocery store and it were to be called Burns Co., then the types of products that I'm going to stock are going to be dramatically different than the types of products that everybody else buys. So for instance, spinach, you wouldn't see spinach at my grocery store. Not going to appear at all. Why? I'm allergic. Why would I carry it? I don't want to eat that. So do I recognize it as a delicious vegetable? It's delicious, but I don't want any of that. So none at my grocery store. So people come in and they go, hi, can you help me find the spinach? Nope, can't. Why? Don't carry it. Well, that's odd. I don't like it. So you bias your decision making quite easily by just making decisions from personal preference. So turning to a partner, can you think of an example of a scenario where bias might creep into decision making, in particular business decision making? Discuss. Okay, so what would be some examples you could share? Let's try to get some people who haven't answered yet.
You're going to hire somebody, you might be more likely to
Ooh,
hire.
Yeah,
Somebody that you know from high school rather than somebody that's actually deserving of the spot.
absolutely. Or you only hire from your college. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So you had one bad experience maybe with a company and then you'll never deal with them. And that also means you may not then come up with then like actual arrangements with the company. Yes. Oh, short-term based decision making. That's terrible. I hate it when people do that. So excellent answers. So why data-driven decisions outperform gut instincts? So they have, so what I will say is they have the potential to avoid bias. I worded it as it avoids bias. And that's because if you truly do data-driven decision-making and you don't bring in your actual gut into it, then you're avoiding bias. Or it's really truly that you have the potential to avoid bias. So improve accuracy. A lot of the times, it allows you to actually be grounded in reality with verifiable trends. Optimize resources, always a good idea. Predict outcomes, also very good. So which benefit of data-driven decision-making do you think has the greatest impact on a company's bottom line? Discuss.
Maybe taking out on maybe optimize
Where it's all about.
optimize research, that's where you can identify data. Where the research on you most benefit, where they're really know that house, you know that they're going into that.
Now, there's a reason I clicked on the answer. It's because this is a perfect example of where multiple answers apply, and it kind of depends upon how you frame your response for whether it's one of the right answers. Okay, so knowing that multiple answers apply, what would be some answers you would say? What would you consider the most important?
That's how optimizing resources was important because you can use data to help you know which thing to choose from. This is a better choice to pick from and help you choose where the resource will be the most efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. What else? What would be an argumentation for a different thing as the most important? Yeah. Yeah, maximizing or optimizing profit. So it kind of depends upon, in many ways, what your missional and strategic agenda is. Which of those is the most important, quote, quote, quote. And what I would actually say is that they're equally important. So it's not necessarily this competitive dichotomy situation of where you have to do one and you can't do the other. Okay, so data-driven decisions and action. So example one, marketing campaign effectiveness. So a company plans to allocate its marketing budget between Facebook and Instagram ads. Using gut instinct, the market, so automatically you can know that there's something super sus at this point. The second I say in the example that using gut instinct, because we just got done saying that we don't want to do that. So using gut instinct, the marketing team might assume Instagram is better because it feels trendy. However, reviewing click-through rate, which is CTR. By the way, what is click-through rate? So click-through rate is how many people utilize an ad to be able to lead them to information about the product. That's click-through rate. So for instance, if you're on, we'll make it Instagram because that's what they were deciding. If you're on Instagram and then you see something and it looks like a real person, but then you notice, oh, hold on, that's an ad. Okay, if you actually click on the ad then to go on for more information, that's a click-through. So reviewing click-through rate data reveals that Facebook generates more leads per dollar spent. So in terms of the platform ad spending in dollars, and in terms of then the click-through rate, Facebook has $500 for the ad spent, and it has a click-through rate. And by the way, it's in this example. This is completely made up. And it has a click-through rate of 3.5%, and Instagram has $500 spent on the ad, and it's a 2% click-through rate. Okay, now, question. Why might Instagram feel trendier? And obviously this is a made-up example, but in other words, what I'm asking you to do is can you come up with a reason why this situation could actually be true? Because I will tell you, Instagram should feel trendier, right? Between Facebook and Instagram, which one came out more recently? Instagram. Okay, so it should feel more trendy, right? Why is it that you could have a product of where it would have a higher click-through rate for Facebook versus Instagram, even though Instagram feels trendier? Discuss. Okay, so let's go with some possible answers. Why is it that possibly it could be that we get more from Facebook than Instagram? Yeah.
I would say Instagram feels trendier, probably trendier with the younger age people that came out recently.
Absolutely.
More of the older population is on Facebook and they have the more tendency to buy things for people because they don't have the money or have any way to.
Yeah, that could be true. Did you have something?
I'm gonna say pretty much the same thing. Like target audience is a little bit older, older generation, and it might not make sense to put your ad on Instagram.
Very much so. So if we're talking about, and this is one of the reasons why collecting information about your customers and who's using your product is so important. If you're talking about a particular platform and you know that the individuals who use the platform are somewhere in the age range on average of 12 to 18, well, 12 to 18-year-olds have a whole lot less expendable cash than individuals who are 50 to 65. It doesn't mean every individual 50 to 65 has more expendable cash, but it is a true statement in terms of, within the United States at least, that more individuals in the range of 50 to 65 have expendable cash than individuals who are 12 to 18. And so that means that knowing who your market is can tell you a lot about explaining these kinds of scenarios that may not instantly make sense. Because we would think if it's the more popular, more trendy platform, meaning Instagram, we would think that we would get more click-throughs. Now, there's another thing that, and I will tell you, this is a tested statement, meaning that there's data to actually back up this statement. I'm not giving you a citation at the moment, but I'm just going to tell you that it's true. Certain bandwidths of generations also are more likely to click on things, even if they don't buy anything. So is anybody aware of kind of like some of the memes of like, the grandmas who download viruses that, take out everyone's internet and stuff like that, because they'll just click on anything. And I'm not trying to particularly pick on grandmas, but I'm saying that this is a memed idea within culture that, like, if you send your grandparents a link, they're going to click on it and they're not going to really test whether or not it's something they should click on. Do you know what I'm talking about? So I don't think I'm making this up. I think this is like a thing that kind of is talked about. Yes. Okay. So certain age generations have a more openness to just clicking on any old link. And some of them have kind of inherent caution about that idea. So with that in mind, that means that really kind of knowing who your customer is in their age, what their preferences are, that's very, very important. And this is the reason why so much money is spent on marketing research, is to investigate who customers are and what they do. Now, in the old days, one of the things that was big for market research was just basic psychology, which is, if we just understand the general ideas of how humans operate, then we can make good guesses. And the fact that I just said guess means that they were in fact making gut decisions. But it will give us good guesses about what our customers might do. And again, that's not a critique of the methodology, because at that point in time, they weren't collecting the information because they couldn't. But now we can do better. Now we can say, this is what the customer is doing. And then you can then ask the question, what psychologically is the reason they're doing it? And that means we've just moved to a higher tier of question. So we move to the statement, they are doing this. Why are they doing this? And then we can then try to test, and if we change this other thing, can we make them do that? And so we've really gotten much, much, much higher in the decision-making chain. So example 2, inventory management. Store manager orders products based on intuition and personal preferences, often overstocking low-demand items. Switching to data-driven analysis, the manager reviews sales data to determine which items to reorder. Okay, so here we have various products. So t-shirts are at 200, hoodies are at 100, caps are at 300, and jackets are at 500. Out of these items, which one would you say should, in fact, and if these are the amounts that were sold last month, then which item would you say should have more purchased for? T-shirts and caps, 100%. Those are the items that were sold more. Now, what would be things that we could introduce as information that would change our answer? What season we're in? Okay, how can this answer suddenly change if we know that we're in a different season?
I think like maybe like in the winter, you won't be needing like t-shirts. You might be not popular. You probably need more like jackets more in the winter, having more high up, having more prioritized.
Correct. We also, just off of this information, don't know if there had been a sale. Was there a sale, and that's the reason why they started flying off the shelves? But at least knowing this begins to inform our decision making. And so that's a start. Okay, so customer retention. Using intuition, a subscription service might think customers leave due to price increases. However, analyzing feedback and churn data, what is churn data? So we're going to use that term throughout this whole course. So churn data is the number, well, in particular, the churn number is how many customers leave our service and or leave using our product or stop using our product. So that's the churn information. It's how many customers do we gain? How many customers do we lose? That's what's referred to as the churn. So reason for churn percentage, price increase, 15%. So 15% leave because of a price increase. Poor support, 45%. Lack of features, 20%. Other, 20%. And I think actually that adds up to 100% if I did that correctly. I hope I did. So when you would actually survey customers, you may find that rather than it being the thing that you think originally, which is just, oh, there's price increases, that's why they left. Well, no, not always, and not necessarily. It could have been the fact that you had poor service or poor customer support, and that could be the reason why you're losing customers. So this is one of the reasons why when we talk about trying to make decisions off of information, actually collecting the information can become vital. Never just think that you know the answer. Employee productivity. Suppose that an HR team assumes productivity is highest on Fridays. Obviously, it would have to be. You know, you go through the week, you had all that experience from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday under your belt, so you got to be the most productive on Friday. Boy, doesn't that make sense. That does not make sense at all. Okay, but let's suppose that that was what it was. So then you say, okay, well, let's analyze how many tasks were accomplished by the employees actually during that time period. So Monday, 120, Tuesday, 100, Wednesday, 80, Thursday, 75, and Friday, 50. I actually feel like this is fairly realistic to myself. That's why I wrote the numbers this way. So by the time I get to Friday, I'm so gosh darn mentally exhausted that I get about half done of what I'd gotten done at the start of the week. I don't know if anybody else experiences that. And then I come in strong Monday and Tuesday of every week. Okay, so after reviewing these examples, which one resonates most with you and why? And by these examples, I mean example 1, 2, 3, and 4. Which one resonates the most with you of like, yep, that makes sense. That's why you need to do data-driven decision-making. Just shout it out. Which one do you like more? I was just kind of curious because I just wrote this for the first time for this class. Yeah.
I would say the one with the t-shirts and hoodies and just use the data to see like what time of year it is, what place you're at in the world.
Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. Okay, so interactive questions. Discuss with someone close to you. What is one major advantage of data-driven decision-making over gut instinct? Explain to them. So there's more than one major advantage. Shout one out. What's a major advantage? Efficiency. What else? Facts. Yeah. What else?
Avoiding personal biases.
Avoiding personal biases. All of these are great things. Okay, so discuss the next question, question 7. How can historical data help businesses make better decisions? And I'll tell you, it's actually, that is a different question. Okay, because it's now saying specifically how is it that the things that have already happened, how is it that that influences our decision making? Okay, shout it out. What would be some examples of how historical data can help businesses make better decisions? Seasonal information from past years. So that was kind of like the t-shirt example. We don't know, maybe the time of year was important. Yes. Oh, knowing what you did wrong, 100%. That's very important. By the way, we don't just mean ethically wrong. We do mean ethically wrong, but we also mean so much more, right? So it's important to be very critical and in a good way of the decisions you've made in the past that were not beneficial. What else? Let's do one more. Was anybody else have anything else? Yeah. Make predictions of the future based upon the past. 100%. And that allows you to do basically as close as you possibly can to like looking in a crystal ball, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so next time, what are we going to do? Well, next time we'll continue from here. We'll go on to lecture 3, which is where we'll start talking about data manipulation techniques in Excel, by which I would then say, if you do not currently have Excel loaded on your computer, please load Excel on your computer. So have a very good one.